welcome everyone to the 8th episode of my new podcast, Pug Fireball and Company. My guest today is Carmen Lampe Zeitler, a devoted baseball fan, Society for American Baseball research member. If she's not, I'm sure she'll correct me. And the host of a monthly luncheon with a few diehard baseball fans in the Des Moines metropolitan area during the off season. Good afternoon, Carmen.
Hi, Steve.
Please share with us where you are from and where you went to school.
Okay. Well, I'm from Mount Pleasant, Iowa, down southeast Iowa, and we lived in Tennessee and Texas when I was in grade school, then back in Mount Pleasant. So I graduated from high school there, and then I graduated from Iowa Wesleyan College there as well. I was a history, political science major, and then sort of took a different turn and ended up working in a church doing Christian education for a number of years, and out of that ended up going to seminary in the Chicago area, and so then was a chaplain in a hospital for a couple of years and have done some pastoral roles, and then for 20 years I was the executive director of an organization in the urban core here in Des Moines called Children and Family Urban Movement. And I retired from that in 2016 and spent a couple of years helping a friend out at a church that she was the pastor of, but been fully retired since about 2018.
And just for those of you who don't know, Iowa Wesleyan College is no more.
Right.
And
So
it
sad.
closed. That's sad to see. Yeah, my
wife's
youngest sister is a graduate of there.
Is that right?
Yeah.
You remember what year, Steve?
No, would have been in the, I'm not sure.
Okay, I graduated in 77, but it was the
This
oldest.
would have been much later.
Okay, it was the oldest operating institution of higher education west of the Mississippi until it closed. Yeah,
and the home of PEO.
Yes,
which
very much so.
There's a lot of PEO history in my family with my wife.
Oh my gosh.
Sister, aunts, my mom, yes. Anyway, but I digress.
That's okay.
So, why did you become a Yankee fan? And how did you become a Yankee? Because you didn't grow up in New York.
No, I didn't. I grew up in various places, but we lived in Tennessee in the early to mid 60s. And my dad, I just love spending time with my dad. And so one of the things that he did a lot of times was watch the game of the week, baseball, on TV after he had mown the lawn and washed the car and whatever he's doing in the morning. And so I just spending time with him. I would just be in the room when he was watching those games. And so those were the years of Mickey Mantle and Roger Maris and Yogi Berra, who as a kid, I probably got confused with Yogi Bear on the cartoons that I was watching too. But that was where the Yankees sort of came into my consciousness. And then my dad was really more, I mean, he watched those games, but he was more of a race car fan. He so he always was watching AJ Foyt, Mario Andretti, and all those guys too. And the other odd thing that I would kind of like to do with him was he, for whatever reason, had gotten interested in the Civil War music, and we had these two big albums from the centennial of the Civil War with songs of the Union and the Confederacy. And when he would get those out, sometimes on Saturday afternoon or Sunday afternoon, my mom and my sister were out of the house, but I would sit down there and listen with him. So he wasn't like a huge baseball fan, but I just remember that was a piece of what we did. So, but then I sort of didn't really think much about baseball for a long time. But when I was in high school, I dated a guy who played baseball and was a huge baseball fan, and he was a California Angels fan. And so he convinced me that I should start watching baseball again. to make the time go faster between football seasons because I was a huge Dallas Cowboy fan. We lived in Texas when the Cowboys first came into play. And so from the Ice Bowl until Jerry Jones fired Tom Landry, I was a huge Dallas Cowboy fan and went to games and saw Roger Staubach and inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, all that.
Wow.
But but I went back to baseball as this young man suggested to make the time go faster between football seasons. So I picked up starting to watch the Yankees again in the 70s. And then since then, that's just kind of continued. When I was in Chicago in the went to Chicago in the early 80s, I discovered Wrigley Field and Comiskey Park. And those couple of years I was a chaplain in a hospital, the Cubs still played all their games during the day. And so if you were visiting people in their rooms in the hospital, you better know something about what's going on with the Cubs, because if they didn't want to talk to you.
Yeah.
And so I kind of became a Cub fan, certainly a Wrigley Field fan in the National League. So, but honestly, Steve, there's something about baseball just in general that has been captivating to me for a long time.
It kind of reminds me of the book I'm reading now by Doris Kearns Goodwin about growing up. Well, it's about the Dodgers. She grew up in New York, and about growing up a Brooklyn Dodgers fan, and her dad taught her how to keep score at age 6. So she would sit with her. She would keep score religiously for her dad, who after work would come home, and then she'd recount the baseball games. It
I love
sounds
that.
like
Is it
you.
Wait till next year?
Yeah.
I love that book too. Yeah.
Who was your favorite Yankee player growing up,
Well, I
and
would
why?
say probably Mickey Mantle. I don't know. I think for some reason I always drawn to that number 7. And but yeah, so Mickey, he was young, he was fast, he was hitting the ball all over the place. So that was probably my guy. But I also should say, not only did I start watching baseball in the 70s, I started coaching Little League Baseball in the 70s. My my brothers played, and my younger brother, who's 10 years younger than me, he was probably 9 at the time. He was playing 8 and 9-year-old Little League. And I saw an 8-year-old get yelled at by a coach
Oh.
for not stretching a double into a triple. So I said to the mom sitting next to me, I said, I think I could do this, and that would not happen. And so I went to the Mount Pleasant Little League and asked them if I could manage a team, and they gave me a
Wow.
team. So I coached Little League 8 and 9-year-olds for a couple of years, and my claim to fame is that I inherited Tom Vilsack as my coach. I was the manager, but he had coached that team the year before. And before he had children, he was an attorney in Mount Pleasant.
All right.
And so my first year coaching Little League, I was a manager and Tom was a coach. And he taught me good things, and one of which was he couldn't go to tryouts. So he told me, when you go to the tryouts, look for kids who can throw, because you can teach a kid how to bat and how to field, but it's really hard to teach a kid how to throw. So I coached that league for 2 years, and then I moved up and coached 10, 11, and 12-year-olds for 4 years. And in there somewhere, became involved in the Little League board and was the president of the board for a couple of years. So they were very gracious to have a woman. I was the woman who coached there. Another woman came on while I was coaching, and certainly the first woman president of the board. So that was fun to learn more about some of the mechanics of the game, because I don't know. I'm not particularly an athlete, but one of the great things that happened early on when I was coaching these 8 and 9-year-olds, we were waiting for people to come pick their kids up. And one little boy just kept saying, Carmen, let me pitch to you. Let me pitch to you. Well, I'm pretty good at throwing the ball up and hitting it to kids, but I didn't know about pitch ball from a 9-year-old. But he pitched me the ball, and by some baseball magic. I hit it out of the ballpark.
Good
I
for
never
you.
had to do it because I was like a legend. She hit it out of the ballpark. Anyway,
They should name
so
the field after you down there.
yeah, right, right. I don't think so, but it was a very good organization and lots of fun with those boys.
What was the reaction from the other coaches, who I presume were all males?
Yeah. Well, the coaches never said much to me. I had a few
Oh.
parents. There was one parent that first year
Hmm.
that came to most of the practices. I think he was watching me, and I was learning then too. And I had a couple of parents because you draft somebody and you call them to say that they were on your team. And I can
Yeah.
remember a couple times when I would call and say, "This is Carmen. I'm calling you to tell you that your son is on the Kenny Construction Phillies or something." And there would be kind of a silence for a minute, like, okay.
Oh.
But I think by and large, parents
Hmm.
were very gracious to me. And the other coaches, I don't remember anybody
Hmm.
being, at least not to my face. But anyway,
Oh, that's good.
it was fun. Yeah.
Did you ever get to see the Yankees play in person, or see
Oh,
Mickey
yeah.
Mantle play in New York or Chicago?
No, I never saw Mickey Mantle, but
Oh.
I'm trying to think the first time I saw the Yankees. I've been to actually I've not been to the new Yankee Stadium. I've been to the old
Hmm.
Yankee Stadium several times, about 3 times I think.
Hmm.
But when they first built the new Yankee Stadium, I was so I don't know. I remember Derek Jeter always saying at the old Yankee Stadium that when their backs were up against it, the ghosts would show up. And I thought when
Yeah.
they moved and started built a new stadium, I thought I don't think the ghosts are going with you. And then initially, I don't know
Hmm.
if you remember, the ticket prices were outrageous initially, more than others. And I just thought that's not right. I'm not going to do that. But I've seen him play. Oh golly, lots of places. Milwaukee. Of course, we go to Kansas City or Minneapolis almost every year to see him play one place with the other. Um, and then, of course, I've seen him play in Chicago with Derek Jeter's last season. One of the most fun games I went to. They played at Wrigley Field,
Hmm.
and that was the merging of my two baseball loves. And so
Yeah.
we got there early because I wanted to see batting practice and I wanted to walk around Wrigley Field. And I had a shirt on that said "Straight to Cooperstown." Had it the two with the number two. And I walked around, and there were the stadium ushers and people who were working were so gracious, and they're all like, "Oh, look at that shirt! Oh, we love Derek Jeter and all that." And so it ended up being 13 inning game, and I don't know how many times Jeter came to bat, but every time he came to bat, from what I could see, the whole ballpark stood up and gave him an ovation, including the guy that was sitting real close to us that kept swearing at Theo Epstein for having ruined the Cubs. So, but he'd stand up every time Jeter came to bat. So that was a really great game. And then one of the other ones that will live in my memory is just last year. The Yankees had a bad year last year, and they came down to the last game of the season to determine whether they would even have a winning season. And
Yeah.
so several years ago, my nephew, I kind of made my family Yankee fans, and so my nephew, who lives in Burlington, when that first Field of Dreams game was played with the Yankees and the White Sox, he called me and he had won the lottery to purchase tickets. And so he said, "Carmen, I think that you're the one that made us all Yankee fans, so you should, if you want to go, you should get the tickets and go." But I said, "Well, Kaylin, if I was going to spend $400 on baseball tickets, I'd rather take everybody to see the Yankees play in Kansas City and take my great nieces and nephews to the Negro League Baseball Museum and all that. So you go ahead and go to the game." And he and his son did. And one of my favorite all-time photographs is Max. My great nephew was 8, And so his dad took a picture over his left shoulder when he's filling out his
Oh.
scorecard. And he's trying to write with his little 8-year-old handwriting, LeMahieu in the first spot. It's a great picture. Anyway, so
Cute.
last September, the last game of the season, they played in Kansas City. And so my nephew called and said, Carmen, do you still want to take everybody to Kansas City and the Negro League Museum and all that? So we did that. And it was the Yankees. I had buttons made that said Yankees heck yes, even though they're not having a good season. And we had a baseball bingo for the kids and everything. And we went to and they won. So they did have a winning season. And we went to the Negro League Museum earlier in the day. And that is kind of a sacred place in
I've
my
been there
estimation.
once.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I met Buck O'Neill there first time I went.
Mm.
He used to hang out there, and he was hanging out in the gift shop, and so
Wow.
I bought his autobiography and
Hmm.
had him sign it for my friend, Dave Polich, who comes to
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
lunches, and
Yeah.
he's been a huge Negro League
Hmm.
baseball fan and student for years. So Buck signed that, and then I also had a children's book that he signed for me. So we probably been a half a dozen times, but it was so before we went, I'd given all my great nieces and nephews. There's 10 of them. Um, Books. Each of them got a book about somebody who played in the Negro Leagues.
Hmm.
And Max, who's the kid that really loves the baseball, I'd given him that book, We Are the Ship, about the Negro Leagues. So one of my best memories with that. So Max is really into it. And he came up to me and said, "Do they have a statue of Rube Foster?" I was like, "Oh my gosh, yeah, who started the Negro Leagues, but not someone that everybody knows about." And so I said, "Oh yeah, there's a statue over here." So he wanted to have his picture taken by
Oh.
Rube Foster. So we did that, and then he and I had our picture taken. And then another one of my great nephews, who was really not much into the baseball thing, he was kind of all over the museum and everything. But at some point, he came running up to me and said, "Carmen, I found Buck O'Neill in the gift shop." And so there's a big picture of Buck O'Neill in the gift shop, which I bought because I thought, well, if no one noticed it, I need to have it. So anyway, so we've gotten along around a lot of games, and of course, there's some that are more memorable than others. But that one last year was great with the whole family. All my sister and her husband and nieces and nephews and their spouses and kids. I don't know, there are probably 20 some of us. So that was fun.
Any other games that particularly stand out that you've been to?
Well, let me think. Um, well, we were at Yankee Stadium, the old Yankee Stadium, the last year that it was standing, and I just I don't remember much about the game. I always admire people like you, Steve, and others who can say, "Oh, I saw this game in 1968, and this happened, that happened, that thing happened." But I remember sitting in the stands before the game and after the game, and just thinking about all that had happened in that space and all the players that had gone through there. Because I think, and I remember just being very kind of moved by that, and one of the things that appeals to me about baseball, I think, is that it's such a generational thing. It's you hear stories so much of people passing on
Mm-hmm.
their memories or their fanhood or whatever. And I think some of those old ballparks are places that kind of hold that somehow. I don't know. But of course, in Yankee Stadium, they have the big monument parks. You can see all those
Yeah.
numbers that have been retired and just some great Yankee personalities. I met Yogi Berra once out at Bob Feller's
Oh.
museum here and got him to sign. I got him to sign a couple of baseballs because I only had a ticket for one, but I said, Yogi, my name is Carmen. Would you sign two? Because his wife's name was Carmen,
Was
and
right.
so he signed two, one for my brother and one for me. So anyway, I think being in that space was
Yeah.
quite something. Um, and one of this is not a Yankee game, but one year, golly, when was this? You could probably tell me. It was the year that Lou Brock broke the Ty Cobb
Hmm.
stolen base record. Um, Probably in the 70s, maybe, huh? Anyway,
Yeah.
a
Don't
friend of mine
mention
and I
Lou Brock. Don't mention him. No,
don't
that's okay.
mention him.
Well,
Okay.
the Cubs traded him for a
I know
sore
the
arm
Cubs traded
pitcher.
him.
For a
That's right.
sore arm. And I saw one of
But
the last games Lou Brock played in with the Cubs. I think it was in Cincinnati, and I got the scorecard from that game. This was in the
oh,
60s.
well, this was late
So it was
'67, but
probably the 70s when he broke the record.
okay,
I'd have to look
because
it
it was
up.
like he was like he had a sign. They had a thing up on the dugout that he was like 11
Hmm.
bases away from.
Short. Hmm.
Yeah, so a friend of mine and I were traveling from southern Missouri back to Mount Pleasant, and I saw in the paper on Sunday morning that the Cardinals were playing the Reds. And
Yeah.
I thought, well, that was, Pete Rose and all
All
those
right.
Reds. And so I said to my friend, let's see if we can stop and get tickets, because
Hmm.
even if we're sitting in the sky, I would love to see the Reds play. So we stopped and we're standing in line waiting to get tickets. And this man walked up to us and asked us if we were looking for tickets. I said, yeah. And he goes, well, I've got a couple. And I asked him how much he wanted for me. So I can't sell them because they're from my company, but I can give them to you. So he
Wow.
gave them to us. And we were like 6 rows up from the first base dugout,
Jeez.
third
Oh
base dugout.
gosh.
Yeah. And Lou Brock,
Wow.
stole a base and everybody went wild. And it was just one of those perfect sort of miracles that happened, that just a day in the ballpark that you hadn't really, you didn't get up in the morning thinking you were going. It was, you went, you had these great tickets. Yeah, it was quite something.
Oh.
And my sister and her family were there the day that he broke the record. And
Hmm.
because when I was there, I got a shirt from my brother that had Lou Brock on it and said the base burglar thing. And then I got a shirt for my other brother. Al Raboski was playing for the
So,
Cardinals then, with the
yeah.
crazy Hungarian, what do you call him, the Mad Hungarian.
Mad Hungarian.
Yeah. So I got these two T-shirts from my brothers. And so my sister said when she went in that day that he broke the record, the T-shirts were like $10, and when she came out, they were 25 because he had broken the record.
Capitalism
Anyway,
at work.
that's right. That's right.
Of course, I'm kind of telling my age, but unfortunately, I got to see games at Old Comiskey Park, Old Crosley Field, Riverfront Stadium in Cincinnati, Forbes Field, Three River Stadium in Pittsburgh, Old Municipal Stadium in Cleveland. I guess that's it as far as old ballparks. But they all had their own neat character about them.
I saw
Yeah.
some games in Comiskey too, and this, more than once I was behind a pole because there's a
Oh,
lot of poles in
like Wrigley
Comiskey.
Field, get stuck behind the
Yeah,
pole. Yeah.
yeah. But one of the best things about Comiskey was we were there when Tom Seaver
With
played for
the
them,
yeah.
and he had won his 300th game or something. I can't
Hmm.
remember. Anyway, but they had a big ceremony and gave him a convertible or something. But our seats were right by the organist,
Oh,
and that was so much fun
interesting.
to watch her, you know, just move with the game. It was just, and she was taking requests from people around her and everything. It was great. We really
Yeah.
had a good time. And then Forbes Field. So my husband is from Western Pennsylvania,
Oh.
and actually a friend of the brother-in-law of a friend, I guess, grew up there. And when they tore down Forbes Field, he got one of the seats,
Hmm.
and he hated Three Rivers Stadium. And so every opening
Yeah.
day, when the Pirates were opening, he and his sons would go to that. There's a section of Forbes Field's outfield fence wall in
Hmm.
Oakland, Pennsylvania, which is
Oh,
near part of Pittsburgh.
Right.
So he would
Yeah.
take this seat and his sons, and they would go to that wall, and they would
Oh.
have their own little opening day ritual, sing, take me out to the ball game. And one year, he got it on the local news or something. But this was the same guy that he always had baseball gloves in the trunk of his car. And if you were waiting for something to happen, you're waiting for to be seated at a restaurant or something, you want to have a catch, and so everybody go out and have a catch. And so I do that too. I keep gloves and a couple baseballs in the back of my car.
Man, it's beautiful.
But
I had an uncle who lived in, well, he lived in Oakmont, right outside of Pittsburgh. Worked for Alcoa in the main office downtown. Every time we go back and visit, he would take my dad and I'd go see a Pirate game down at Forbes Field. We saw the
that's
Cubs
great.
play there. We saw the Cardinals play there. We saw Bob Gibson beat the Pirates
Oh wow,
one time. Yeah. Now, as far as Sabre, I presume you're a Sabre member. Are
I
you a
am.
member of Sabre? Yeah, okay. When did you
Mhm.
join Sabre?
Well, so I knew about Saber through Dave Polish because he was the first person I knew who was a member, and he'd gone to the Negro Leagues conferences that they have every year. But then I'd gone to a few presentations that John Liepa made. You know, the John, you've had him on your show. He's baseball historian and a researcher and member of Saber. um, he started coming to these baseball lunches, and I think it was John who suggested that for one of the, we just sort of have some random focus, and so he suggested that Ralph Christian, another Saber member, could come and talk about the connections to the Black Sox scandal in 1919, connections to Des Moines. And so Ralph came and he brought, and Steve Ellsbury came too, who was a Sabre member. They all came to that lunch. And Ralph was great with his knowledge about all of that. And so then Steve and Ralph and John all started coming regularly to the lunches. And so somewhere along the line, the three of them gave me as a gift a membership to Sabre. That's been 3 or 4 years ago or something like that. So I've continued to keep that. And I'm not active like all of you are, but I really appreciate Steve used to get people together to watch ball games and at the iCubs and certainly the publications and everything that Sabre gives. And I've gone on a few Zoom, especially during COVID, conversations about women in baseball and some things like that. So it's it's one of those organizations that you could dedicate your life to because there's so much going on. Yeah.
You kind of answered my next question. How have you benefited from Sabre? What are the benefits you've received?
Well, I've the the magazines like they did one Roberto Clemente. They did one the recent recent ones that and then focused on women in baseball. I certainly appreciate those, and I pass those a couple of those on to other people in my family so they could read them too. And like I said, I do pay attention to. I read the This Week in Saber thing, emails that you get, kind of see what's happening. I I hope sometime to go to either a Negro League conference or a general conference. Last year it was in Minneapolis, which would have been a handy place to go, but we had family visiting from Pennsylvania that we had that scheduled for a long time, so I couldn't do that. But you've been to some of those?
I've been to one Negro League conference down in Kansas City. That's when I got to see the Negro League Museum. Yeah, that was, and the final night, final day, the children of Satchel Paige were on a panel discussion about their dad. And I guess they don't make too many public appearances. I guess they've gotten burned before by sports writers, so they're pretty careful about going out in public and talking about their dad. But they were there. George Altman, who was a Cub Cardinal, he played over in Japan for a few years. He was there, got his autograph. So yeah, anything close. I've never been to the annual conference. I don't know. They've been in Chicago. I think we had family commitments that year. And Minnesota was close. I just didn't go.
Yeah. So when you saw when you were in Kansas City for the Negro League conference, was there did they have you go out to Satchel Paige's grave?
No.
Because
Mm-mm.
that's quite something in Kansas City. I mean, it's a big
That's odd. No,
structure.
they didn't. We didn't go out there. That's, yeah, they should have done that. Huh.
Well, yeah, it was what was surprising to me. So we went and saw that, and I was looking for Buck O'Neill's grave because it's in the same cemetery.
Oh.
And it is the cemetery has like a big stone that talks about Buck, but it's not anywhere near where
Yeah.
he's buried. And so he's
Oh.
buried in a very there's a stone in the ground, and of course his wife was died before him.
Oh.
Um, but I've been there a couple of times, and both times somebody has had their baseballs on his grave, and
Oh.
we had
Yeah.
to ask the first time we went. We asked a groundskeeper if he knew where it was, and he took us right to it. But I think
Hmm.
they might have plans to do something a little bit more for Buck. But anyway, well, and that's so probably a lot of people became Negro League. I mean, just knew about the Negro Leagues and fans because of Buck O'Neill's involvement in
Hmm.
Ken Burns' baseball
Yeah.
documentary. And that's the first time, honestly, that I ever heard much about the Negro Leagues. And
Hmm.
sort of like most of America, fell in love with Buck O'Neill. And I even heard Ken Burns say once that when he dies and goes to heaven, if St. Peter doesn't have time to watch everything he made, he would ask him to watch inning 5 of baseball,
Oh.
which shadow ball uh, when he does all the stuff about the Negro Leagues,
Yeah.
although he goes through the whole thing. But so that's, yeah, I just,
I was fairly aware of Negro Leagues pretty young because my one baseball idol, Ernie Banks, played with the Cubs for 19 seasons. He was in the Negro Leagues, and they purchased his contract directly from the Negro Leagues, so he went directly to Chicago in 1953, September of '53. He didn't
well,
play
and
in
then,
the minor leagues. He went directly from the Negro Leagues.
okay. Was that happening more by then? Because somebody said yesterday that happened with Larry Doby too, that he went right to the major
He
leagues
went
anyway. I don't
to
know.
major leagues. I think most of them went. Most of them went to the minors. Like Hank Aaron went to the minors. Jackie Robinson played in the minors. Then they went to the
Sure.
major leagues.
Yeah.
But the Cubs were so desperate. I guess they needed. They thought he could help, which he did.
Well, and the Cubs hired Buck O'Neill to be their,
That's
first
right.
and coach.
He had
So
a lot to do with the bringing Lou Brock of those Billy Williams, like they were talking about yesterday. Yeah, he saved Billy Williams for the Cubs.
he
He
did.
influenced not to quit. Have you written anything for Saber? I know some of us have written articles for Saber.
No, I haven't,
Oh,
Steve.
okay.
My baseball, but I am doing trying to write a couple of baseball things. One of them is well, both of them are children's books, and one is about Derek Jeter's grandmother. Um, his grandma Dorothy, she lived in New Jersey and really was the genesis of him becoming a Yankee fan. And so when he used to visit her in the summers, he would get her up early to go outside and play catch with him. And he tells a story that she didn't mess around. She was throwing the ball hard to him and all that. And so Derek Jeter was one of those people. Um, People feel different ways about the Yankees and and Jeter, but I think overall you got to say he had a magical career. I mean, he was the rookie of the year, and he played consistently without injury for many many years. MVPs of uh, series and 5 series rings, and then being on the first ballot to the Hall of Fame. And there's one thing after another, and so my little book which I have a draft of, first draft of, is Grandma Dorothy Caught the Dream. So, he when he was in the fourth grade, he said he was going to play shortstop for the New York Yankees. And I think that it's that sort of take somebody to believe in your dreams. And Grandma Dorothy did that early on. And the other one is about Buck O'Neill. So when Buck O'Neill was not elected into the Hall of Fame, when all the 17 other Negro League players were,
Yeah.
um, I had a bumper sticker made for my car that said Buck belongs in the Hall of Fame. And so I
Hmm.
got to thinking, Buck O'Neill was told over and over and over again in his lifetime that he did not belong, from growing up in
Yeah.
segregated South and not
So,
being able
yeah.
to go to high school because there wasn't a high school where he lived. Certainly the baseball thing in the Hall of Fame, that was the last. So the book is Buck Belongs, but it's about how even though he was told that he didn't belong over and over and over again, he never believed it,
Hmm.
and he acknowledged that he did belong, even when he wasn't, even when they didn't put him in the Hall of Fame. They did put a huge statue of him right outside the Hall of Fame, um, to his humanity and his connections to the game and everything.
Yeah.
And so then, of course, he was elected a couple of years ago, and thanks
Yeah.
to John Leo.
Hmm.
So John is a member of the Hall of Fame, and so when Derek Jeter was elected into the Hall of Fame, John gave me his tickets to go to the induction ceremony. So my husband, very graciously
Wow.
went, and my sister-in-law too. We all went over to Cooperstown, and when that was all over, my sister-in-law said, "Well, would you ever come to another induction ceremony?" And I said, "Well, then I'd only come again if Buck O'Neill was elected," and he was elected the next year, so we had to go back again. John gave us the tickets then too.
Oh, that's nice.
So
Wow.
anyway, I'm working on those two
Hmm.
books, but they don't take. I mean, I've done a lot of reading about Buck O'Neill over the years, and the book that was mentioned yesterday, "The Soul of Baseball" by Joe Posnanski, is, I think, a masterpiece. And that's one of the things I love about baseball is it is so, I don't know, literary or something. People write so beautifully about baseball. I mean, books, but stories and even poetry. If you've been to the baseball lunches, I'm always bringing poetry to because it lends itself to that. So I'm trying to channel some of that to get these books where I
Well,
want them to be.
I look forward to them. But
Yeah, we'll
before
see.
we go, I'll have to talk about your experience conducting a celebration of life service for recently dearly departed Sabre Field of Dreams chapter president Steve Ellsbury. How did that come about?
Well, Lynn, his wife, well, I guess the first, I think, isn't Mike Covier is I might say his last name right. He's a
Yeah,
member of SABR.
right.
And I saw Steve
Yeah,
death notice, in that email that Mike sent, and I was just
right.
heartbroken. I mean, he's just such a good person and certainly baseball fan, and it was just fun to be around him. He loved the game so much and everything. So anyway, Lynn called maybe a day later to and said that they've been talking about a service, and for whatever reason, there are a lot of clergy, retired clergy, or whatever, in that baseball lunch group. It's just, I don't know why that is, but it is. And so there's probably 6 or 7 of us. and but Steve used to always say, "Well, all these clergy around," but sometimes he was agnostic, sometimes he was atheist, but he wasn't having it. And I there's a lot of all of it I don't have either. But anyway, um, so I think she was looking for what can we do that is true to him. And so she had talked with the people at the iCubs, Randy Wayhofer maybe, and asked if there'd be any way that they could have the service at the ballpark, and had gotten the green light for that. So then she asked me if I would do the service. So, um, you know, those are always bittersweet things. It's like you're really honored to try to figure out a way for people to come together and celebrate and honor somebody's life, but it's also just so sad, especially when somebody dies suddenly and unexpectedly.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm telling you, Steve, and on the good side, on the sweet side of it, it's probably spent 3 days reading baseball stuff, thinking about Steve with purpose. You can think about baseball all the time and read things and all that, but Steve had been a reader too. So he had recommended books to me. One of which was that book, A Day in the Bleachers, about the first game of the 1954 World Series, and the man and the author just plays out the game in this book. And he had recommended that to me, and I bought it and read it, and I had marked some places in it that I thought were really well written, and I just like to go back to them. So I pulled that book out, and it felt kind of like Steve was saying, "Okay, here you go. This is something you can use." Um, and then there's so much around baseball that's kind of ritual, just like funerals
Yeah.
or weddings or whatever. And so the tipping of the hat, the singing of the take me out to the ball game,
Yeah.
those things are all kind of part of a baseball ritual that fit very well with trying to honor Steve.
Mhm.
So it ended up being, and then I think I've said this, that the people who came loved Steve, but also spoke the baseball language. And so I just felt like when
Yeah.
we were doing that together, that people were into it and bringing all those pieces together. So it ended up being, I think, a good way to remember Steve and figure out how we keep going without him.
Have you conducted any similar services at ballparks, at
No,
baseball parks?
but I said this may open the door to a lot of things. I don't
Yeah.
know. I certainly have done a lot of funeral services in the last few years that for people who don't really have a church connection or don't have a faith tradition or anything like that, and so we need to find ways to do that important piece in a person's life um, that fits them. And really, I got to tell you that we were in the skyboxes that they could open up in left field, and um, looking out over the ballpark. I mean, that's beautiful. Yesterday, somebody Jerry Perkins said about being at the old Detroit stadium that it was like going to a cathedral. And I think a lot of baseball fans have had that experience when you come up out of where you come into the ballpark and you come
Right.
up and you
To the
see
field.
the green, the
Yeah.
field. I mean, I almost get teary just saying it now. And some days, the
Yeah.
blue sky above, there is something very, I don't know, moving about that. And
I was
so
going to say some people think of baseball stadiums as cathedrals.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, and I understand that. And yeah, and good for you to be able to see some of those old ones that, um, really had that feel to them.
Especially like old Yankee Stadium, Wrigley Field, Fenway Park that have been around for 100 plus years.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
we went to Fenway. That was not a Yankee game, but I thought
Oh.
if we were, if you're a Yankee, if you're a baseball fan and you're in Boston, you should go to
I
Fenway
like to
Park.
go there. I've never seen it.
We had we had a Pedro Martinez pitched a no hitter, or not a no hitter, shutout that day against the Mariners, I think it was. But the things that happen at Fenway, people get cheers going, they get clapping going. I mean, it was like,
Yeah.
I think I wrote a sermon about that because it was like, wow, what's happening here? And I did not wear any Yankee gear. I didn't know how that would be
Uh,
responded to, but
probably smart. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
One last thing here, and now tell me if I'm wrong here, but in April of 2017, I looked this up. There's a person by your name, anyway, who received the Dingman Peace Award. Is that you?
That was me. Yep.
Named after the late Bishop Maurice Dingman, Bishop of the Diocese of Des Moines from 1968 to 1986. During the award
Yeah.
ceremony, you were called humble, gentle, and kind. Wow.
Wow.
So, what did that award mean to you? And what
Well,
was it for?
so the Catholic Peace Ministry gives out this award every year to people that they, and I always, when people were given awards, I always think that there's a whole lot of people don't get awards that should,
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I think for years I was involved in a peace committee that we started having ecumenical services praying for peace, and we started right after 9/11, and that
Oh,
went still going. It's still going on, and I
hmm,
think also the work that I did with CFUM around child advocacy uh, with children who live with the stresses of poverty and racism,
hmm,
classism, all those things. Um, I think those are the kind of things that they were trying to lift up is, what do we
hmm.
do, and building community. And
Yeah.
really, Steve, I think one of the great things about baseball is the way it creates communities. Even these kind of goofy baseball lunches that we have half a dozen times a year, there's a community there that I think people appreciate,
Hmm.
and a connection. Even Jeffrey, who said yesterday he's a Dodger fan, he doesn't get to come very often because he teaches. He's often
Oh.
teaching, but he said, and he teaches history and political
Hmm.
science and things that are hard to teach right now. But to be in
Yeah.
that place where you kind of just have the joy of talking about baseball. So I think the Dingman Award and all that is related to that. Bishop Dingman was a phenomenal person from Southeast Iowa too. He's from St. Paul down there, um, and one of those people that just was so humble and accomplished so much in terms of helping the church to do the things that needed to be done and not just staying in the church buildings and all that. So yeah, that was a great honor.
Yeah, I read a little bit more about him. I guess he's the one who invited Pope John Paul II to visit the
Yeah.
diocese here, and the Pope celebrated a giant mass out at Living History Farms in Urbandale on October 4th, 1979.
So that's,
Uh,
Iowa Public Radio or Iowa Public Television. Is that this week? They're having a big
are they?
documentary about
Yeah,
that,
better
about the
better
Pope.
tune in on it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite the deal.
Well,
So,
thank you, Carmen, for spending part of your day with us. I know you're quite busy, so I'm glad we were able to work this in.
it's always good
Um,
to talk about baseball, Steve. I
speak.
appreciate you doing these things. That's what
Yeah,
fun.
it's once an author, now I'm a podcaster. At least I'm trying to be. But this worked out great. I learned a lot about you, and yeah. And speaking
Yeah.
of baseball, you can get my book, Pug Fireball and Company: 116 Years of Professional Baseball in Des Moines, Iowa, by going to pugfireballandcompany.com, or else there are 6 other locations that are selling the book: Des Moines, Altoona, Ames, Page Turner's bookstore in Indianola is now selling it, so it's out
I got mine
there.
at Beaverdale Books. I got
Well,
mine at Beaverdale Books when you were
okay,
talking about it.
yeah.
Yeah. That's
And
good.
while we're in the middle of high school and pro football, let's not
Mm.
forget the Chicago Cubs and the Iowa Cubs. The Cubs open their 2025 season, get this, on March 18th and 19th at the Tokyo Dome in
Oh yeah, that's
Japan
right.
against the Los Angeles Dodgers.
Yep.
I don't
Yep.
know how they've only had spring training for what, maybe, well, a month by then, maybe, so may not
But
be a
still,
very good game. The I
well, I
Cubs
heard.
op- the I
I was
Cubs
going to say, I hope
open the 25 season next year on Friday, March 28th at home against Omaha. So March
That's really
28th, it could be a little cool. We might have a little snow. Who knows? Late
well.
March.
I heard Pat Hughes talking about that. At the end of, I love listening to the Cub broadcast on radio, and he was kind of looking ahead when things were going not where they wanted them to go
Going
for the.
south. Going
Yeah.
south, yeah.
So anyway, that'll be great. Yeah, I'll put
Yeah.
those things on my calendar. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks for doing this once again. And this hopefully it'll be on YouTube probably early next week.
Okay, good. I'll look for
So
it.
hope you like it.
Yeah, thanks so much for
Yeah.
the
Good
invitation.
day.
You too. Bye bye.